This podcast is sponsored by Talkspace. You know when you're really stressed or not feeling so great about your life or about yourself? Talking to someone who understands can really help. But who is that person? How do you find them? Where do you even start? Talkspace. Talkspace makes it easy to get the support you need. With Talkspace, you can go online, answer a few questions about your preferences, and be matched with a therapist. And because you'll meet your therapist online, you don't have to take time off work or arrange childcare. You'll meet on your schedule, whenever you feel most at ease. If you're depressed, stressed, struggling with a relationship, or if you want some counseling for you and your partner, or just need a little extra one-on-one support, Talkspace is here for you. Plus, Talkspace works with most major insurers, and most insured members only pay a $25 copay or less. No insurance, no problem. Now get $80 off your first month with promo code SPACE80 when you go to Talkspace.com. Match with a licensed therapist today at Talkspace.com. Save $80 with code SPACE80 at Talkspace.com.
Criminology is a true crime podcast that may contain discussion about violent or disturbing topics. Listener discretion is advised.
I'd like to welcome everyone to episode 75 of Criminology. I'm Mike Ferguson.
And this is Mike Morford.
Morf, how are you today?
I'm doing good. A little bit overcast today. We're expecting some rain, so I'm hoping we can knock out this recording before the storms come in. How about you?
Yeah, people don't, well, I'm sure they realize it, but probably don't think about it a lot. It's not like we are in a super soundproof bunker at all times, right? So if my neighbor is mowing the grass, if you've got a guy outside using a chainsaw, well, we might have to put off recording for a little bit. It happens. Or like you said, a massive thunderstorm, if it's pretty loud, it'll come through for sure.
Yeah, a lot of times they've got planes and helicopters and everything else going over, and the microphone picks that up. So,
well, it's because you live like 3 steps from this big Air Force base. There's like bombers flying over, sorties. Like there's missions coming out of there. I don't know what's going on. There's a cannon that fires sometimes.
Yeah, it rocks the house a little bit, but you get used to it.
It's like living in Chicago right next to the L or something. You see in those movies, like in Seven. Remember they bought that apartment and it was like every 20 minutes that the whole apartment was rocking.
Yeah, a couple of days of that, you get used to it. No big deal.
All right, so 2 episodes down, right, for our Son of Sam coverage. We're into episode 3. This is the last episode. And, I think people are going to enjoy what we have for this 3rd and final episode. Because not only are we talking more about Son of Sam, David Berkowitz, we're going to hear from Carl Denaro a little bit more, but we're also going to get into some conspiracy theories. Not everyone believes that David Berkowitz acted alone in carrying out his killings.
And Carl Denaro is among those people that has come to believe that, and some of the stuff we're going to cover, it makes you pause for a second and ask yourself, could there be something to this?
Yeah, and I think what makes it interesting is that, Carl Denaro was a victim. You heard from him in episode 1. So to get his take, to get his thoughts on Berkowitz and, what he believes really happened, to me, it was fascinating.
Yeah, and I think when you're talking to somebody that is involved in the case that was a victim, and they personally believe that there's more than meets the eye, that gives me a little bit more, maybe adds a little more validity to the possibility of that there was something else going on.
So all that to come, but we have some new Patreon shout outs to give. So let's do that. We had Brittany Dayton, Heather Leeming jumped out at our highest level, Pete Wright, Chi Wang, Adam, Karen Wilson, and Faye Rao. So a lot of new support. We love it. It's much appreciated.
We can't thank you enough for your Patreon support. It really means a lot and goes a long way. And if you'd like to help support Criminology on Patreon, you can do so by visiting patreon.com/criminology.
All right, Morph, let's dive right in. We're picking up this third and final part of our Son of Sam coverage. As we closed out last episode, we mentioned that while David Berkowitz was rotting away in a New York prison, not everyone was convinced that he alone committed all of the Son of Sam shootings. And that included Carl DeNaro, our guest from episode 1.
The only thing that's going to make him talk is a guilty conscience. And I guess by finding God, he's kind of circumvented that whole guilt thing because, according to him, God has forgiven him. He didn't shoot me, so I can't forgive him for shooting me. There definitely was a satanic cult. There's no two ways about it. And Berkowitz was definitely part of it. There was definitely satanic practices going on in Untermeyer Park.
So that was a little snippet of Carl talking about his belief that David Berkowitz was not actually the man that shot him, and that he was really part of a larger story, one that involved a conspiracy and a satanic cult. Morph, when you think about it, those are some pretty strong beliefs that Carl shared, especially, like we mentioned, since this was a guy that was a victim of the Son of Sam shootings.
Hearing talk of a conspiracy and a satanic cult, to many people, it may sound hard to believe, but there are some nagging inconsistencies in the Son of Sam case that we need to address. Maybe those nagging inconsistencies lend credibility to the possibility of more people than David Berkowitz being involved. And we're going to talk about some of those things today. Carl went from being a victim to survivor to armchair detective in the Son of Sam case after teaming up with author Maury Terry, who was researching for a book he was writing about the Son of Sam case.
What Maury Terry found led him to believe that there was more than meets the eye in the Son of Sam case. And as Carl DeNaro dug with him alongside Terry, he began to agree. Terry laid out his case for conspiracy or cult involvement in the Son of Sam crimes in his books, The Ultimate Evil, The Truth About the Cult Murders, and Son of Sam and Beyond, and The Ultimate Evil, an investigation into America's most dangerous satanic cult. So 2 different books that this individual, this author, Maury Terry, wrote. Think about all the research, all the time that went in to write these 2 books, basically centered around the same central theme, which is this was not David Berkowitz acting alone. This was a cult. This was a satanic cult that he was involved with that led to the Son of Sam murders.
A couple of these books, a couple of the editions, I should say, are out of print and hard to find. And if you can find a copy, you're going to spend, a pretty good chunk of change to get these books. I'm lucky that I have a copy, a used copy of one of the hard to find ones. And it's really in depth and has a lot of interesting stuff, photographs, and whether or not Maury Terry was correct that there was something going on here, he definitely put the research in to put into those books. Carl DeNaro told us how his relationship with Maury Terry came to be, and he talked about some of the things that people have seized on that seem to indicate that there may be something to the theory that David Berkowitz didn't act alone.
It was a long journey that took, I guess close to, 13 years. The first incident happened in 1980. I was at a civil case. All the victims got together and basically hired lawyers to sue the estate of David Berkowitz. And my lawyer was, it was basically saying, look, he's got no money, but if anything's ever made, a movie, a book, you guys should share in it. So this was a hearing to basically determine the percentages that each victim would get based on the severity of their injury. And during that hearing, Harry Lipstick, one of the lawyers, kept telling the judge, Your Honor, other people are involved. And the judge was saying, Harry, this is not the time or place. So I turned to my lawyer and said, what's that little guy talking about? And so my lawyer explains it and says, yeah, there's some theory out there that other people are involved. I'm like, really? I had no idea. So that was it. That was January of 1980. Maury Terry's book comes out in 87. I read this book, and he lays out this blueprint of this cult that perpetuated the Son of Sam shootings, and it blew me away. The first 3/4 of the book is just like, to me, rock solid evidence that other people are involved. The last section of the book, not so much. I think he, kind of made a lot of assumptions and didn't really cross all the T's and dot all the I's like he did in the beginning of the book. But from that point on, I was like, wow, there might be something to this. This all makes perfect sense to me. And I was fascinated by it. And 1990, I happened to meet, just by perchance, the New York City detective, a ballistics detective who worked on my case. I actually worked with his daughter, and he told me that the ballistics report, number one, he wrote, back in '76, that a 90-pound weakling or a female more than likely pulled the trigger. I'm like, really? That's interesting. And he goes, oh, by the way, the file's gone. It's no longer in where it should be. Okay. So 2 years later, 1993, Maury Terry does some jailhouse interviews with David Berkowitz. And on one of them, Maury asks him, did you shoot Carl De Niro? And he says, no. And he said, do you know who did? And Berkowitz says, yes. Goes, can you tell, is it a man? He said, no. Is it a woman? Yes. Could you give us her name? And I'd rather not say. So I'm sitting in my living room listening to this. I'm like, this is crazy. So now I'm starting thinking all these little milestones that I just told you about. I'm putting, 2 and 2 and 2 and 2 together, and it's like, there's something to this. There really is. And then it all kind of comes together in, I believe it was 94. I got invited to do a spot on the Geraldo show. Unbeknownst to me, I was sharing the stage with Maury Terry. So I got to meet Maury that night, and we became very good friends. And not only friends, but I became an investigator. Researcher in the Son of Sam shootings. Maury had no computer, no interest in doing that. He was definitely old school. So I started doing his research for him, his internet research, and he would give me, he'd give me like somebody's name, said, see what you can find out about this. Then I started getting the hang of it, and I started doing my own research, and I kind of knew what we were looking for. I would take like information or somebody's name that we thought was connected to the case, and I would do deep dives into that person's life and who his friends were, and the more I investigated, the more I was convinced that Maury, his basic premise is correct. Did he make some mistakes here and there? Did he stretch the truth here and there? I think he did, but basically his story rings true. And if you're a believer in coincidences, which I'm really not, it's like, one or two is like, oh, that's ironic, that this guy knew that guy. But when you get literally hundreds of coincidences, that's pretty strange.
Carl laid out for us some of the things that he feels need to be investigated further in the Son of Sam case.
I think more importantly than the cult thing is to show the listener that other people were involved. Because you kind of get bogged down with the cult. There's, from all the research I've done, there's so many layers to it. And even I get confused as to, who's who and who's doing what. But if you stick to, there's more than one person responsible for the Son of Sam shootings. You could start with the NYPD, their own information. Start with the sketches. They produced 9 sketches based on eyewitness rememberings of the shooters. You can clearly see that there's different people. 2 of them look exactly like Berkowitz. There's no 2 ways about it. And Berkowitz openly admits that he did, he did the 2 shootings in the Bronx, killed 3 people, but he didn't shoot people in Brooklyn. He didn't shoot people in Queens. Now take a look at another one of the sketches, and take a look at John Carr, a photograph of John Carr and a photograph of Michael Carr, and you'll see 2 sketches, 2 police sketches that you would swear these 2 guys posed for the sketch. That's how close they are. These are the sketches that the NYPD put out to the public to help catch this killer. And I'm telling you that the sketches are a good place to start.
So, Morf, I think we need to talk about the sketches in this case. There are several that we talked about in previous episodes, and while some resemble each other and resemble David Berkowitz, others are drastically different. Some of these look nothing like the others. They look nothing like Berkowitz at all. And of course, I think you can say, well, sketches are never perfect, right? It was dark. Witnesses never remember things exactly as they saw them. Sometimes I think witnesses have a hard time relaying information to a sketch artist. I get all of that. I think that would be very difficult for me, to have seen someone and then try to describe that person to a sketch artist. I don't think that's the easiest thing to do. And I'm amazed, to be honest with you, how good some of these sketch artists are in taking information from somebody sitting across a desk from them and then putting it into, this unbelievable sketch that, let's face it, more often times than not, I believe, turns out to look eerily like the person that's ultimately caught.
And back in the 60s and 70s, they weren't always using those composites. Sometimes they were using those etch-a-sketch type piece together composite makers that you just take a hair from one, put it onto a face of another, adjust things, and it was like a cookie cutter designed composite. And when it was finished, it didn't really look like a real person. And I think some of that was at play, but in the Son of Sam case, these were actual composite sketches done by an artist.
Yeah, that reminds me of some of the toys that I used to really like when I was a kid, where you might have 3 plates, and using those 3 plates, you could interchange them, make different cars, make different designs. That kind of reminds me of what you're talking about with this cookie cutter approach to compiling a composite. But here we have sketches of men with completely different hairstyles. They have different parts in their hair. The hairlines are different, completely. Some of the sketches show a man that's thin with blonde looking hair. And obviously that's nothing like David Berkowitz. David Berkowitz was, a little on the chubby side. He had dark curly hair. Really, a stark contrast between David Berkowitz and some of the sketches. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Now, what that means is up for interpretation, right? And everybody can make their own assessment of that. It's a lot of what we'll be talking about in the rest of this episode. But in that last clip, you heard Carl mention Michael and John Carr. And we're going to talk a little bit about them coming up. They were the sons of Sam Carr, the neighbor who owned the dog that Berkowitz said, barked orders at him. And not just orders, right? Not get me some kibble. It was go out and kill.
We also have witness Tommy Zano. He was the witness that watched the shooter attack Stacy Moskowitz and Bobby Violante in his rearview mirror. Zano watched as the man approached from near a park entrance. After Son of Sam was arrested, and Zano saw him for the first time, his first thought was, that is not the man I saw that night. He was too heavy and too pudgy to be the shooter. So this statement by Zano is pretty self-explanatory. In fact, in an interview done for the show Unsolved Mysteries back in the 1980s, Zano said, I don't think it was Berkowitz then, and I don't think it's him now.
And Morf, I think you have to stop and take a minute to talk about Unsolved Mysteries. First of all, that was a great show. And I think the importance of that show is that it probably turned a lot of us into true crime addicts. Or if it didn't turn us into that, it helped feed our fascination and propel us along this path that a lot of us are on of being interested and fascinated with true crime. I mean, Robert Stack was amazing. He had that great voice. It was just one of the first shows that I remember, as a young person thinking, God, fascinated, man. I want to know what happened. Give me the details.
Yeah, I remember growing up in the 80s, and I was 16 years old at the time that show was premiering, and I really loved it. And being a 16-year-old and wanting to go out and hang out and do fun stuff on a Friday or Saturday night, which is when Unsolved Mysteries was on, it kind of created a dilemma. So finally we got a VCR, and I figured out how to record it, and that was just awesome. And watching some of those episodes now, it's really nostalgic. And the segment they did on Son of Sam was very interesting.
Well, and that's the other thing. I think if you look back at it now, it holds up, right? Obviously it's not maybe on par with some of the great true crime things that are out today, but I think it holds up well for something that is going on, 30 some years old. In this next clip, you're going to hear Carl Denaro talk about the importance of a yellow Volkswagen.
Police realized that a yellow Volkswagen was seen at least 4 of the shootings, and they were on the hunt for the yellow Volkswagen. Who owns a yellow Volkswagen? They did all sorts of searches. Turns out there was like 2,000 yellow Volkswagens registered in the tri-state area, and it became an impossible task. So, and the reason I bring this up, because when they arrested Berkowitz and he owned a Galaxy, which looks nothing like a yellow Volkswagen, you never heard the NYPD mention yellow Volkswagen ever, ever, ever again, which is kind of strange, because if you're reading what the police are doing to catch the killer in April, May, June, July, up to August 10th in 1977, they're looking for the yellow Volkswagen. They arrest Berkowitz. He's got a cream-colored Galaxy, Ford Galaxy, and they stopped talking about the Volkswagen. I could tell you that a yellow Volkswagen was sitting in the car driveway, car with double R's, Sam Carr's house. A yellow Volkswagen was sitting there sporadically during that period.
And there's no doubt, Morf, that a yellow Volkswagen was seen on the night of the Moskowitz Violante shooting, pulling up to the area of the park entrance not long before the shootings occurred. And then after the shots rang out, witnesses said they saw a yellow Volkswagen leave the area. Tommy Zano saw that same yellow Volkswagen drive by his car a couple of times leading up to the shooting. This was around 1:35 a.m. So you start to put this timeline together here and you realize it's pretty tight.
At 2:05 a.m., a policeman ticketed Berkowitz's car, which was parked on Bay 17th Street, about 2 blocks from where Moskowitz and Violante would later be shot, close to Bath Beach Park. This is a spot about 0.2 of a mile southwest of where Berkowitz got the ticket. What's important here is that eyewitness Cecilia Davis came home after a night out and saw a man who she later identified as David Berkowitz taking the parking ticket off a Ford Galaxy. She noted that the police that were giving out tickets were still within sight of her, and they were issuing more tickets. After the man she identified as Berkowitz took the ticket off the Ford Galaxy, he got into the car and started to drive away. But the car that had brought Cecilia home was parked in the middle of the street, blocking Berkowitz's path, and he started to blow his horn. They moved out of the way, and Berkowitz drove by, heading further up Bay 17th Street, before taking a right onto Bath Street, as if he were following the police.
So there's a couple of questions to me, Morf, that come out of that. Berkowitz is there allegedly with a gun in his car before the shootings actually occurred. So the question is, would he be, blaring his horn at 2 a.m. with police right up the street in sight? Now, to me, it doesn't seem like you would want to draw attention to yourself in that situation. If you have a gun in your car, if you're out searching, let's say, for potential victims, but we are talking about David Berkowitz. I think what's important is this movement by Berkowitz in the timeline, because, at this point, it's now a little bit after 2 a.m., maybe 2:10, 2:15, somewhere in there. And he was seen driving in the complete opposite direction of where the shooting was later to occur. At around 2:20 a.m., Stacy Moskowitz and Bobby Violante were walking through the park towards Bobby's car when they saw a man watching them in the darkness near a park restroom. Apparently, they weren't overly alarmed by what they saw. They made it to Bobby's car. This location is about 2 blocks from Cecilia Davis's apartment, where she had watched Berkowitz drive away at around 2:10, 2:15.
One thing's for sure, and that's that David Berkowitz couldn't be in 2 spots at once. He couldn't be driving his car down Bath Street, almost 3 blocks northeast of the park, and also be the mysterious man in the park that was seen by Stacy Moskowitz, Bobby Violante, and Tommy Zano. And how could he be driving 2 different cars? A Ford Galaxy like the one Berkowitz owned is pretty big. A Volkswagen Beetle, that car is small and couldn't be mistaken for a Galaxy.
No way. There's no way that anyone in the world is ever going to look at a Volkswagen Beetle and then a Ford Galaxy and say that those look similar. They don't in any way, shape, or form. The Galaxy's more of a big boat. Everybody knows what a Volkswagen Beetle looks like. It's a little compact thing. It's got the rounded edges, just completely night and day.
I think some of our younger listeners, they're even younger ones will know what a Volkswagen Beetle is. I think they reissued the Beetle not too many years ago. But a Ford Galaxy they may not be as familiar with, but that was, like you said, a boat, a big tank. That's one of those big cars you wouldn't want to parallel park in on a city street someplace.
At 2:33 a.m., Cecilia Davis went out to walk her dog in front of her Bay 17th Street apartment. When she looked up, she saw the man she had seen earlier driving away after getting the parking ticket. Now he was walking down the sidewalk. She didn't talk to the man that she later identified to police as Berkowitz. Instead, she brought her dog inside. About a minute later, she heard several gunshots. The time was roughly around 2:34 a.m. The shots that Cecilia heard were those being fired at Stacy Moskowitz and Bobby Violante 2 blocks away.
So some people ask, How could David Berkowitz have made it on foot 2 blocks, or about 0.2 of a mile, in 1 minute? To walk that distance casually, it would take 3 minutes or so. To walk it briskly, maybe 2 minutes. It was after these shots were fired that witnesses saw a thin man with stringy blonde hair, which was possibly a wig, run from the park and take off in a yellow Volkswagen, heading up 17th Avenue. Some would later wonder if this thin man was actually a woman. The driver ran a red light and nearly missed colliding with another car.
So we have this yellow Volkswagen. We have different descriptions of shooters. What many people have said is the impossibility that Berkowitz could be in more than one location at once or drive 2 different cars. I think more this is where a lot of the conspiracy theories come in, right? It is difficult to reconcile some of these things, to add all of this up. I think a lot of it is based on the timeline. And again, the timeline is what people said it is, right? Is it exact, or do people say that it was around this time? Because I think that would be me, right? If asked by police, I would say, well, it was around 2:15. I don't know. Could have been 2:05, could have been 2:20, unless there was something going on where I knew exactly what time it is, or it was. And that happens sometimes.
And one thing we don't know for certain is if police took the time to construct a timeline based on phone calls coming in about shootings, that kind of thing. So you wonder if somehow they did put a timeline together that was official.
Well, yeah, we know they put a timeline together. I think to your point, my question is always, well, how'd you do it? You know, what links did you go to really try to nail down what a person said and how it fit with what other people said? I think that's always the key, but we have to get into the Carr brothers. And the question that comes up a lot with the Carr brothers is, did they play some kind of role in the Son of Sam crimes? They were the sons of Sam Carr, and we talked about it early on, right? Sam Carr and David Berkowitz had a history. David Berkowitz had some serious issues with Sam Carr. I don't think, Morf, that Sam Carr knew that the threatening letters and the things that he was receiving were actually from David Berkowitz. But there was a connection there.
Author Maury Thierry claimed that John Carr went by the nickname Wheaties, and a line in one of the Son of Sam letters reads, "John Wheaties, rapist and suffocator of young girls." We don't know more about that nickname, although the Carr brothers had a sister whose first name is Wheat. John Carr looked pretty similar to a couple of the Son of Sam sketches, especially the ones created following the attack on Stacy Moskowitz and Bobby Violante. But there was one glaring issue with John Carr being involved in the Son of Sam crimes. In the mid-1970s, he lived in Minot, North Dakota, 1,600 miles across the country. But according to reports, he did frequently travel back to New York during the Son of Sam crime spree.
John Carr was working as a mechanic at the Minot Air Force Base during that time, and it might be easy to write John Carr off as not being involved in the Son of Sam crime since he lived so far away. But his part in the Son of Sam saga is dramatic enough to maybe hold back from doing that. On February 17th, 1978, this was about 6 months after David Berkowitz was arrested, John Carr was found dead in his girlfriend's Minot apartment. He had apparently shot himself with a rifle, and it seemed like a clear-cut case of suicide. But less than 24 hours later, Carr's girlfriend came to police asking them to investigate his death as a murder. She told them that Carr had been in fear for his life prior to being found shot.
Perhaps most interesting of all was that a Son of Sam symbol, like the one included in the letter to reporter Jimmy Breslin from Son of Sam, was found scrawled on Carr's phone book. A friend of Carr's in Minot reported that he had walked into his own house and found Carr and another man conducting some sort of ritualistic sacrifice of an animal on his kitchen floor. Needless to say, this friend wasn't too happy with John Carr. In research for his books about the Son of Sam case, Maury Terry extensively looked into the Carr brothers' backgrounds and found evidence that they were both involved in a satanic cult.
It was Michael Carr that allegedly introduced David Berkowitz to this satanic cult in 1975. At 4 a.m. on October 4th, 1979, 2 years after Berkowitz was arrested, Michael Carr was driving at a high rate of speed on a New York highway when he struck a light post and was killed instantly. There were no witnesses to the accident, so you have to talk about this. We have two brothers alleged by some people to have some involvement in the Son of Sam attacks, and both of these brothers are found dead within 18 months of each other. I think it's those type of things, Morph, that lead to conspiracy theories, right? People grab on to things like that and say, wow, that can't be a coincidence, right? Two brothers killed within 18 months of each other.
I think the key word you just used was killed, because they weren't, it's not like they were old and ill. They were young, and to die under those violent circumstances, it makes you wonder.
Yeah, I guess that was kind of a strange word for me to use. You know, the first brother, it appeared to be suicide. The second brother, it appeared to be an accident. But to a conspiracy theorist, those two deaths could be explained as somebody taking them out because they knew too much, right? We've all seen the movies that involve conspiracy theories. I think that's a pretty easy leap for somebody that believes in this type of conspiracy theory to make.
And it's not like David Berkowitz didn't know the Carr brothers. It was in depositions given by David Berkowitz in 1978 and 1982 that he admitted knowing the Carr brothers, and he verified that they were part of a satanic cult. Berkowitz also stated that the brothers were killed to silence them. He also claimed that there were women involved in the Son of Sam attacks.
There was other people involved at a higher level that were into pedophilia, drug dealing. I'm talking like major drug dealing, and human trafficking. Kids were being coerced from 42nd Street in Manhattan, and basically, pimps were procuring these kids to have sex with rich and famous people. That's all true. It's documented, and these were all part of the quote unquote Son of Sam cult, or satanic cult, the 22 Disciples of Hell. There was a lot of rich and famous people that were involved. They weren't involved in the shooting, don't get me wrong, but the people who did the shootings were kind of like the foot soldiers for the rich and famous. Like any other cult. You get people who are, disenfranchised from society. They don't have any friends. They can't get a date. They join like a cult, and it's like all of a sudden there's girls, there's drugs. You're being invited to parties in a mansion in the Hamptons. Take any cult and you look at its members, and it's usually people who, are searching for something, that something's missing in their life. And Berkowitz certainly fits that mold. If I'm not mistaken, there's 18 people who have been identified as, cult members, friends of the cult members that have turned up dead. I'm trying to think. I want to say there's 18 people, I believe, in 4 years that met an untimely death. And most of them were very strange deaths. For example, there was a couple whose bodies were found with their blood, all their blood drained from the bodies. There's another couple who supposedly was involved in making a snuff film, who was found with a bullet in the back of their heads, and the apartment ransacked. Of course, you got the two Carr brothers, which Michael Carr and John Carr, who, lived down the street from Berkowitz's apartment. Trust me, I don't have all the answers as to why people did what they did, but I could certainly lay out enough circumstantial evidence that would lead most people to say, there's something here. Something more has got to be investigated. There's too many coincidences. From the ballistics person to Berkowitz saying on national TV, I did not shoot Carl DeNaro, but I know who did, and it's a woman. And I know two women who were involved in the shootings, either as a lookout or a participant. And one of them is very handy with a gun. She actually, at one point in her life, she actually sold ammunition online. She was married to a cop. She knows her way around guns, and my guess is she's a pretty good shot. So I have eliminated her. I mean, I guess there's a small percentage that it could be. She just had a bad night. My guess it's the other woman who didn't have experience with guns, was an avowed Satanist, and she actually had way back when, she actually had a public access TV show where she advertised herself as a Satanist and a witch. I know who she is. I know where she lives. She's about 72 now. I don't know if I'm going to name her. I'm not going to name her now. I'll tell you that right now. I am writing a book. If the editors let me state her name, I probably will. Because my goal at this stage of the game is to rattle cages. Because that's the only way this case is going to ever be reopened. Either, someone on their deathbed, someone gets a guilty conscience, or you're rattling up cages where people start getting nervous.
So is there any truth to any of this? Is this just a case of satanic panic or a convenient scapegoat for Berkowitz's twisted deeds?
And Morf, you and I are both old enough to remember the days of satanic panic. It was pretty widespread. It was on the news. It really got to the point where you couldn't escape it. From the media's point of view, it was thought to be going on all over the place. At least that's what I remember. I just remember it being so pervasive in the media. Oh my gosh, you got to watch out. Everybody's into Satan. They're looking to sacrifice people. It really got out of control.
Yeah, I remember in the 1980s that the panic that was going on, and they were labeling CDs because they thought that there was satanic messages in the music. I'm too young to remember a lot of what was going on in the 70s because I was just a kid back then, but I do remember some of those movies like The Omen and The Exorcist and things like that, and you wonder if that fed into any kind of satanic panic that was going on.
I think it all fed. I think the movies, some of the heavy metal rock bands and their lyrics, I just think it was an easy way for some people to explain the bad things that were going on in the world. And I'm not saying that there wasn't some of this going on. It was so widespread. It kind of became this catch-all phrase, right? For anything bad that happened, it must be satanic panic. There are just some bad people, man, that do really bad things. And not everything is related to some type of satanic worship, or it's just not. But if there was any truth in this, Untermeyer Park in Yonkers may hold the answers. Samuel Untermeyer was a prominent attorney and socialite in New York City in the late 1800s and early 1900s. He created this place called the Untermeyer Gardens. It was basically his gift to his neighbors. It was filled with lush green hedges, shrubs, plants. It was dotted with statues, columns, and buildings. I think more of this, it was kind of a really amazing type of place, this gardens that Untermeyer built. But by the 1970s, during this time that the Son of Sam attacks were occurring, the park had fallen into disarray. lack of funds to keep it maintained, it eventually turned into an eyesore. People went there, tagged it with graffiti. There were seedy characters roaming through these gardens. It literally became the stuff of nightmares. This was the place you didn't want to go to at night. Now, this park was located 1.5 miles north in Yonkers from where David Berkowitz and Sam Carr lived.
There was definitely satanic practices going on in Untermeyer Park. That was actually proven in 1970 by NYPD detective Jim Rothstein. He knew all about it in 1970. This is 6 years before the first Son of Sam shooting. So it's definitely true.
In the 1970s, a series of strange occurrences involving Untermeyer Park raised concern for area residents. Workers on the overnight shift at neighboring St. John's Hospital frequently claimed to see torch flames moving deep within the woods. Strange chanting was also frequently heard, and the park's old abandoned pump house became referred to locally as Devil's Cave. And we know that we have a lot of listeners that are animal lovers, so we just want to give you a word of warning that in this next part, we'll be talking about animals being harmed. A 1976 police report documents the finding of carefully mutilated German Shepherd bodies in the aqueduct south of the park. And in August of 1977, the day after Berkowitz was arrested, 2 boys playing in the park found 3 dead German Shepherds partially buried. 1 had been shot in the head, and 2 others strangled with chains.
So if we take all of the information that we've covered in these episodes, what do we have? Do we have all the pieces of the puzzle in the Son of Sam case? That's the question. Did David Berkowitz act alone, or was he part of a satanic cult that hatched a plan to kill people? Or again, is that just another byproduct of the time and that whole satanic panic theory? I think one thing that's very telling to me, Morf, is that after David Berkowitz was imprisoned for the Son of Sam attacks, the Queens District Attorney's Office made it known that they wanted to question the men seen in the various composite sketches. So that is telling, right? At some point, the attorney's office thought there's some other people out there possibly, and we should be looking for them. I mean, make of that what you will.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if David Berkowitz acted alone. Why are they looking for these other guys?
And again, I think it's another one of those things that helps feed into the conspiracy theories. Just like you said, why would they be wanting to talk to other people if David Berkowitz acted alone and committed all of these crimes?
The DA's office also wanted to speak to the owner or driver of the yellow Volkswagen that was seen so many times. Although that owner or driver never came forward, a witness got a partial plate number for the car. That plate ended with 4GUR or 4GVR. And I think in so many episodes, Mike, we talk about these cars that stand out and may provide leads in a case, but they never go anywhere. Here we have a yellow Volkswagen and 4 of the 6 characters of the license plate, yet that still didn't lead to it being identified.
And maybe more if that goes to the fact of probably just how many yellow Volkswagens there may have been at the time. I mean, Volkswagen Bugs were an extremely popular model, right? Back in the day. They got popular again when they came out with them, kind of rebooted them. But, you think Bundy, you kind of think 70s as a time where 60s and 70s, there were a lot of Volkswagen Beetles sold in the United States. A lot.
And I don't know if we have any old-time New York City police out there listening, but I'd be curious how the tracking of license plates went back then. Because to me, it seems if you have 4 of 6 digits of a yellow Volkswagen, I don't know what the process was, but it doesn't seem like it would be all that hard to track down based on that information. But for some reason, they never did find that owner.
And maybe it just goes to the technology, which you and I have talked about many times, today, if you had those four, could you get there? I'm sure there's a computer program that could give you all the possible combinations that involved those four or the other four, right? 4GUR or 4GVR. And I don't think they had that back then. And I think a lot of that stuff was done by hand, by looking through lists. That's my assumption. I could be wrong.
Despite the dead ends and the lack of any solid proof of a satanic cult or conspiracy in the Son of Sam attacks, that hasn't stopped Carl from trying to uncover what he feels is the truth.
I don't know how this thing is going to end up. It might stay the same for forever and ever. I'm not really sure how to break the case wide open, but I'm gonna keep trying.
One thing we asked Carl was if this satanic cult is still out there, or people that were involved in a conspiracy back in 1976 or 1977 are still around. And if so, aren't you worried about something happening to you the way it happened to people who were possibly silenced years ago?
I've been asked that question a few times, and my answer to that is, at this stage of the game, 40 some odd years later, if I publicly accuse somebody of being a shooter, my guess is they would spend their time defending themselves and saying, "What, are you crazy? It's like, I own this flower shop and, I'm 70 years old. This guy's out of his mind," as opposed to coming after me to shut me up. Because if someone shuts me up, that's the case. Trust me, I don't want that case to be rattled. But if someone comes after me, to shut me up, that's a big cage to rattle. I think that would open up a lot of eyes, saying, maybe this guy's not full of it. Maybe he's onto something. So my guess is these people, anyone that's still alive that was involved, would go the route of saying, "I don't know what you're talking about. It's that was 40 years ago. I didn't even live there," or whatever excuse they want to use. I think that would be the easiest route for them to take. So in that respect, I'm not really nervous. But again, I haven't released any names, so it's easy for me not to be nervous. That might change.
It's one thing for people to speculate about David Berkowitz being part of a cult or conspiracy. But in the 1990s, David Berkowitz sat down with Maury Terry face-to-face and talked about his alleged cult activities and co-conspirators. Berkowitz accepted responsibility for the murders of Don Aluria in the first Son of Sam attack, and for Alexander Esau and Valentina Suriani in the sixth attack. But he denied pulling the trigger in all of the other Son of Sam attacks. He even claimed that some of the others involved in the conspiracy were women.
Was that shooting done by a woman?
I was there at all of them in the area and scouting, and I had a part. I'm responsible for my involvement in those things, and definitely guilty. Some people had other ideas. I guess that's what was decided upon. It was just kind of like a Mad Men on the Loose type thing. I didn't have any real friends. I didn't have any real hope or future or goal in mind at the time, just going from day to day. And I felt alienated.
Berkowitz claimed that he met the Carr brothers, and that was the introduction that set him on an evil and irreversible course.
I met him and at that party, and we just kind of got acquainted. He was basically an outgoing guy with a lot of zip, a lot of wild, crazy ideas. We began to talk about the occult. It just came up. I was kind of like a misfit at the party. I didn't know anybody, so I was just hanging out over there. And he, we started to rap, and one thing led to another. He wanted to take me to this park, and meet some people. Right? Woven deeper into the Westchester group was a mixture of more hardcore individuals, and there were known as the process in general terms, although they didn't really use that name a lot. I mean, this is not just something they were doing for any type of necessary pleasure, but that was just a part of an agenda, a very deep, covert and hidden agenda. You know, they were about making war, and they believed that the end of the world would come around the year 2000, and they believed that Jehovah and Lucifer and Satan were working together to bring about terrible cataclysmic events. And these people were, based on that belief, they were working with Satan. Got involved in this. I never knew that I was going to become a murderer. I never knew that I was going to hurt anybody. I just joined for a thrill, looking for some friends, looking for some companionship, looking for some fun or whatever. You know, I was bored. I was lonely.
Now, you heard Berkowitz in that clip mention the Process Church. The Process was a religious group established in the mid-60s, and they had a reputation as being a cult that was investigated for crimes including murder. In fact, there were some ties between members of the Manson family and the Process Church. It's also important to note that other people backed up claims made by David Berkowitz. One of them was a man who wanted to have his identity disguised. He later identified for police the owner of the home where he said the Son of Sam crimes were initially planned. And as we talked about earlier, many of the people that were alleged to have been involved in the planning of the Son of Sam murders met with untimely and violent deaths.
The question that jumps out to me is, what reason would Berkowitz have to lie to Maury Terry about being involved in the satanic cult? He was already in prison for life, and in his own words to Maury Terry, he said as much.
I'm doing life without parole, and that's the real deal. I'm doing consecutive life sentences totaling more than 300 years. There is a parole hearing in the year 2002, but that's not a parole hearing to go out into the street. That's just a parole hearing to sign me over to begin to do my next life sentence. So according to the way the law is, I have to do one life sentence after another, which means in all reality, I'm never getting out.
And for me, this is the crux of it. Statements that David Berkowitz has made, you know, after being in prison, what's the truth? And to your point, Morf, what does he have to lie about it? Now, I think a lot of people might make the argument that he wants to stay relevant, right? What else does he have? He's in prison. He's lost his freedom. But the one thing that he can do is get someone to listen to him, say some things that maybe nobody's heard before, and that brings him back into the spotlight. Well, what's a better way to do that than to talk about the fact that these Son of Sam murders that were committed were all part of a big satanic cult? I think you see that a lot with some of these infamous killers. I go back to Bundy. Bundy did a number of interviews as his time in prison progressed, and he made a lot of claims. I think specifically, Morf, I remember the one where, you know, he was talking about pornography and how, you know, that was really the root of all of his issues. Again, I don't know what's true and what's not true a lot of times when it comes to what these guys talk about. But what I do believe deep down is that they crave the spotlight because they don't have anything else. People at some point start to forget about them a little bit, right? Nobody really ever forgets about Ted Bundy. Nobody ever really forgets about David Berkowitz, but the media dies down. The circus leaves town, and you just wonder how much of this has to do with them wanting to get back into the public eye.
The issue for me personally, and maybe for listeners, is that David Berkowitz has changed his story multiple times in the last 3 decades, so it's hard to know what's true and what's not. And when he's conning people or if he's telling something that's truthful.
And I think that's one of the biggest issues with a lot of these killers. They flip-flop. They change. Are they looking for the next outrageous thing? And whatever that is maybe contradicts what they've said before, but they don't care because they know this is going to get airtime. It's going to put them back in the national spotlight.
As we mentioned in part 2 of our Son of Sam coverage, David Berkowitz today is at peace and claims to have found and been saved by Jesus. If he was ever truly involved in anything satanic, it appears as if he has left that behind.
And I think appears is the key word there, Morf. A lot of these guys, and women for that matter, seem to find religion after they're incarcerated. And again, it's like with everything with these people. I don't know what's real. I don't know what's not real. It may be absolutely true that David Berkowitz is a changed person. He's found religion in prison. But if you were to let David Berkowitz go right now and he hit the streets, does that found religion follow him? Or is he looking to do something, commit some type of crime immediately? I have a hard time believing what most of these killers say.
And one interesting thing that I noticed, you can find lots of videos about David Berkowitz in some of these interviews that he's done over the years from 1977 till now. And if you look at the early videos, he has that crazy-eyed look and he sounds pretty irrational. But when you look at him in his later years, he seems controlled, calm, rational. So I wonder if that is a sign of true change, or could that be some kind of act?
I think it's a great point. You know, maybe he really has changed. You know, one of the cases that I kind of go back to when it comes to this issue is actually a woman. And Gibby and I covered it on True Crime All the Time. It's the case of Carla Faye Tucker. You know, when she was a young girl or a young adult, she was wild. She was on drugs. And she killed people with a pickaxe and was sentenced to death. Later in life, after she was incarcerated, she claimed to have found religion. And it was pretty well documented. I mean, from everything you read, if she was putting on an act, it was an Oscar-worthy performance. That was a case where I truly felt like she was repentant. She felt bad. She had changed her ways. Now, at the same time, I don't believe she ever should have been let go. And she wasn't. The question in that case was, should she have been put to death? Right? She was sentenced to death. And if she had not changed her ways, I don't know if anybody would have really cared all that much. But because she was so outspoken in her faith, there was a lot of people, Morf, and I know you remember that case, that came to her side and rallied against the death penalty for Carla Faye Tucker. Now, I don't think anybody is saying that David Berkowitz should go free. I don't think anybody's saying that. So, Morf, I think as we go into wrapping up this episode, just, you know, kind of let's give our final thoughts on this case. For me, and I said it right up front, David Berkowitz has always been a guy that has truly fascinated me, you know, from the crimes that he committed, which I think are scary in the fact that they were random, supposedly. I mean, as far as we know, right? There's never been any connection, as far as I know, between David Berkowitz and any of his victims. And I think those are scary types of crimes. You know, you're sitting in a car with someone, maybe you're doing a little kissy face, and out of nowhere, somebody walks up and starts shooting. I mean, you can say the same about the Zodiac. A lot of these Lover's Lane type cases, those are scary because of the randomness of it all. And then what's probably even more fascinating is when you find out what kind of fueled David Berkowitz, right? The the letter writing and the Son of Sam, Harvey, all of that. It's an interesting study. And I think it has been studied extensively by, mental health professionals, by criminologists, by a lot of people. This is a case that people have spent a lot of time combing through.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. And to me, just the added layer of terror, because I felt like the Son of Sam attacks were an act of terror. When you can scare the residents of New York City and panic an entire city like that, with that many people in it, it shows the power, that the randomness of it all, and the scary letters that he wrote. It shows what kind of impact that had on that city. And luckily he was caught, because if he wasn't, we'd be here over 4 decades later talking about who was he, how did he get away with his crimes. I think when you see a capture of the person and you get to see what made them tick, you get a better understanding of why they did what they did. And it's very fascinating.
And I also think it's important that this case has been studied so much, right? Law enforcement, mental health professionals, I think, have learned from this case and other cases like it. And hopefully that has helped in the years since the Son of Sam killings to better identify people, to better help people. I don't know what all it's done, but hopefully if there's any good that has come out of it, it's something like that. But you mentioned New York City, Morf, and I think we talked about it. New York City is almost like a character in this story. The fact that one man, if it was one man, right, depending on what you believe in, could paralyze a city the size of New York City. That's unbelievable.
And you just touched on something, the question of whether it was one man. I don't know that I'm in a camp where I think there's a conspiracy in the case, but there are some questions which I think I agree with Carl on that need to be looked into a little bit more, because some things don't seem to fit quite well into the entire Son of Sam puzzle.
And I think that's what you need to start a conspiracy theory, right? You need questions that either haven't been answered or are uneasily answered.
Special thanks to Carl Denaro for joining us in our Son of Sam coverage. We spent a couple hours talking in depth with him about this case and how it affected his life. If you're a Patreon supporter, keep an eye on Patreon, because that interview in its entirety will be out soon.
Yeah, it's a fascinating conversation, and Carl really goes in depth about some of the alleged satanic cult involvement. Obviously, we could only put so much of it into the episodes. The interview was very long and in depth. You can also check out Carl's Facebook group he helps run called The Official Maury Terry, The Ultimate Evil, Son of Sam, and Beyond group.
Thanks also goes out to Debbie Buck at TrueCrimeDiva.com and Kate Morris for writing and research assistance in this episode.
As always, if you haven't done so yet and you love the show, go out, give us a 5-star rating. We love all the interaction on social media. We love the fact that people continue to tell their friends about the show. Word of mouth really plays a big part in helping Criminology grow.
And if you're active on social media, we'd love to hear from you. You can find us on Twitter with the handle @CriminologyPod. We're also on Facebook. Just search Facebook for Criminology Podcast and you'll find us. You can also join our Facebook discussion group, which is called Criminology Podcast Discussion and Fans.
All right, Morph, so that is it for our 3-part coverage on David Berkowitz, Son of Sam. I think 40 plus years later, right? People are still fascinated by this guy, what drove him to do what he did. It just shows you the impact that he had on not just New York City, because that impact was huge, but really the impact that he had on a much bigger scale. But that's it for another episode of Criminology. We'll be back with you next Saturday night with a brand new episode. So from Mike
and Morf,
we'll talk to you next week.
Take care, everyone.